And now, please join me in welcoming Thunder Levin, the writer of Sharknado.
Thank you, David. Thank all of you for joining me today for this most important presentation. Since the beginning of history, human society has been held together by a common language and frame of reference provided by the shared communal experience of storytelling. From Neanderthals sitting around a campfire, to the classic Greek plays, to the commoners assembling for Shakespeare, to the works of Hitchcock and Spielberg playing for packed movie theaters, those shared communal experiences are what held our society together. They gave people from disparate backgrounds, cultures, and socioeconomic classes a common framework and understanding. Just a generation ago, every man, woman, and child in America was required to watch The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson so that they would know what everyone was talking about the next morning. But as the technological revolution of the internet has fractured the way we consume media, with people watching what they want, when they want, where they want, how they want, that water cooler moment has been lost. If half your friends cover their ears when you start talking about Game of Thrones on Monday mornings because they haven't seen it yet, you understand what I'm talking about. And with that fracturing, with that loss of the shared communal storytelling experience and the resulting loss of a common language, our society began to break down. Friends no longer spoke face-to-face or even on the telephone. Instead, we poked each other electronically. People no longer gathered together in groups, but instead posted in chat rooms without ever truly knowing who they conversed with. And conversation itself became a lost art, giving way to texts and emoticons. And so our civilization careened towards self-destruction. Into this pre-apocalyptic decline, in July of 2013, came the most unlikely of saviors. When a ridiculous TV movie about a tornado of sharks premiered on the Sci-Fi Channel, the most surprising thing happened. Our society as a whole ground to a halt, and billions of people all over the world flocked to Twitter and began to converse. Our modern gods, also known as celebrities, joined the conversation. Such luminaries as Elizabeth Banks, Will Wheaton, Patton Oswalt, Olivia Wilde, Judah Friedlander, Damon Lindelof, the producer of Lost, and even Mia Farrow and Philip Roth all tweeted about Sharknado. During the initial broadcast, the Sharknado hashtag generated over 5,000 tweets per minute. That night, the movie became the first shared communal storytelling experience of the internet age. And by the next morning, the water cooler moment had been reinvented and society had a new common language. Therefore, in summary, I'm sure you'll agree that I'm not exaggerating when I suggest that the humble sci-fi movie Sharknado has saved civilization as we know it. Thank you for your time.
All right, Thunder. Well, thank you. It's hard to know how to follow that up.
The key to Sharknado is that no one ever seems to know when I'm kidding, so I like to just...
So while we were sitting there watching the trailer, you mentioned that opening scene, which was cinematically criticized.
Yes, even in our promo, they pointed out that the opening scene with the mafioso type had nothing to do with the rest of the movie, and that shouldn't be surprising because I didn't write it. I had one opening shot of a Mexican fisherman on his boat looking up at this huge wave of sharks and saying, "Necesito un barco más grande," which obviously you can tell is, I'm going to need a bigger boat. And then the wave crashed over him and the sharks ate him, and that was it. And it was just one shot. But when the director came to shoot it, you know, this being a low-budget film and all, he couldn't justify renting a boat and going out on the water and bringing the whole crew and spending a day just for one shot. So he invented the mafioso scene sort of on the spot. And they just, and when I watched the premiere, I hadn't seen the film. I was watching the beginning of the movie thinking, what the fuck is going on?
You're going to edit that out in post, right?
Oh, you didn't tell me I had to watch my language.
Oh, sorry. So how did you come to write Sharknado?
You asked that like it's an odd thing. It's funny, I had done a film for the Asylum, the production company, called American Warships, which they liked quite a bit. It was one of their more successful productions. And so they asked me what I wanted to do next. And I had a couple of things. I wasn't really sure. And they said, we want you to do this movie called Sharkstorm. And I was like, why? Haven't we had enough shark movies? And so I turned it down, especially knowing that the Asylum has a habit of playing their movies completely straight. And I knew with the budget that it would have, there was no way it was not going to be cheesy and people would laugh at it instead of with it. And so I was developing some other ideas, and then like a month later, they came back to me and they said, forget Sharkstorm, it's Sharknado. And I was like, what do sharks have to do with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? Because I heard Sharknado. And he said, no, Sharknado, a tornado full of sharks. I said, oh, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. And as long as I can do it that way, I'm in. And they recognized, despite never doing tongue-in-cheek, that something called Sharknado pretty much had to be handled that way. And so then I just had fun with it and never expected anything to come of it, or I would have directed it myself because I was originally attached to direct it. And then something strange happened.
Yeah, so could I get the screen up here? Was that response really overwhelming for you? Did you have any idea anything like this could happen?
It's funny because I had joked with a friend after I wrote the script. I'd finished the script like the summer before, summer of 2012, and then went on to do another project because I directed another film in the jungles of Costa Rica at the same time that Sharknado was being shot in L.A. But I remember joking to a friend that someday, goddammit, I'm going to win an Oscar. And even then, all anyone will want to talk to me about is this crazy thing I've written called Sharknado.
Little did you know.
Little did I know. We had a hint that something might be brewing about a week beforehand. The commercials seemed to be getting good response, and the press was starting to pick up on it. I did a really fun interview with IO9 where they asked some very serious questions, and I answered in the most serious manner possible. And then July 4th came around, and a couple of friends who had gone to different July 4th parties called me up and said that people had been talking about Sharknado, and it hadn't aired yet. And I was like, they're talking about Sharknado? How can that... And then things like this started happening. Yeah, but no, I mean, we thought maybe it might turn into a little cult hit. But when it blew up on Twitter that night, it was just surreal. We had nobody expected that. We went on Twitter expecting 100 people, and 10 would be asking us serious questions, and 90 would be telling us how much we sucked, and that would be it. And then we tried to get into the tweet, and you just couldn't get in because there were just so many tweets coming in, and then the celebrities started getting in on it. And the most surreal part of the night for me was trading tweets with Damon Lindelof, who was the producer of Lost and also co-wrote Prometheus. He's the one who took Prometheus from being a true prequel to Alien and turned it into a not-quite prequel. And so I ended up trading tweets with him because he said that he was going to write the sequel to Sharknado and have it done by the time Sharknado was off the air. And so I countered that I hoped he would let me be involved, but I thought that rather than a sequel, we should do a prequel, only not quite. And he responded, touché, and that just made my night.
And then since then, we've had NATO.
NATO's added to everything.
And
yeah.
Did you ever expect there to be a twerknado?
Is there?
There is a twerknado.
Well, depending on who's doing it, I'd like to see that.
So how do you come up with this stuff? I mean, do you wake up and say, oh, yeah, of course, I know how to fix that problem. A guy will jump into a flying shark with a chainsaw. Like,
See, you say that like it's something odd. It just makes perfect sense to me.
well,
What do you
something to
find
hold on to.
illogical about that? How would you handle the situation?
This is why you're the interviewee and I'm the interviewer.
You know, people always ask me that. I don't know. I mean, I don't do drugs. I wasn't drunk or high when I wrote it. It's a matter of taking a disaster movie, a standard disaster movie, and following all the rules of screenwriting. But when you get to the point where people say that's not believable, you just keep going. Because it's Sharknado. And we could justify just about anything. Now, I should say that in the first 2 films and the first 80% of the third film, everything that happens is at least theoretically possible. Highly unlikely, I'll give you, but at least theoretically possible. Once the sharks went into space in the third one, we sort of lost that.
You feel your credibility kind of went out the window
the
there.
thing is that in the script for the third one, when the sharks were blown into space, they're blown up with a lot of water. So when they get into 0G, each shark is in a globule of water floating through. So
Makes
it
sense.
still made sense.
Yeah.
But when the director shot it, he didn't. I don't know whether he made the choice or the effects department couldn't do it. But at some point, the globules of water were lost.
That's a loss for humanity.
Yeah. So it would have been
Would have made
scientifically. The Jet Propulsion Lab, after the first movie, the Jet Propulsion Lab put out an article that was supposed to debunk Sharknado. And all they really did was end up saying, well, yeah, it is possible. We just don't think it's going to happen.
You'd think those guys would be, working on something else. So
Well, they got to do important stuff.
That's true. Nothing could be more important.
That's what I say.
So with this kind of fearless over-the-topness, which is what I love about the movies, like, do you ever, like, before they go on, are you, like, ever worried that the audience kind of won't come for the ride?
Not anymore.
Well, what about before the first one?
Yeah, the first one, I didn't expect anybody to watch it.
Uh-huh.
And then when it blew up, we knew we'd tapped into something, I guess. And the second one, we just had fun with.
Mm-hmm.
And Sci-Fi wanted it to take place in New York, which is great because I'm from New York, and so I got to sort of play with the whole New York versus LA thing. I live in LA now, but I'm very cynical about life in Los Angeles, and I think that shows in the first movie. And so when we came to New York, I wanted to make sure it was the opposite of that. I wanted to show how the whole city, would come together in the event of a Sharknado.
The way only New York can.
As only New York can. And I mean, that's kind of a highbrow thing to talk about for Sharknado. But there is
I think
real
it was a
stuff
moment of
behind
healing
some
for
of
the
it.
city.
I'll tell you, when we were first talking about what to do in the story, I had proposed that the Sharknado be heading towards the New World Trade Center. And Finn would see this and go, oh, hell no, not on my watch.
Oh, yeah.
And then the last stand would have been defending the new tower. And it was decided by the powers that be, and I was willing to be convinced on this, that might be a bit touchy. And so we moved it to the Empire State Building, which is more iconic anyhow. And I knew I wanted the shark at the end to be impaled on the spire, so it all worked out.
Excellent. Now, you're a huge Yankee fan, I believe.
Fuck yeah. No, you're going to have to cut that out, too.
Now, how did the Mets come to be?
I don't know how you're going to do with the product placement. We'll have to blur out
We have technology for that.
I mean, you guys don't own Coke yet?
No, we're focused. We're focused. So, anyway, so how did the Mets come to be featured in Sharknado 2?
Yeah, that was disappointing for me. It was supposed to be the Yankees. It was written as the Yankees. The guy who hits the shark into the bleachers for the home run was supposed to be Derek Jeter. And
You couldn't get Derek.
Well, we couldn't get any. The Yankees said, "Oh, hell no!" I mean, I think that's where the title for the third movie came from. Is the Yankees' reaction to Sharknado? And the Mets said, "Yeah, come on." So what's funny is that you'll notice there's actually a little goof when they're taking the train back from. It's not Shea Stadium. What? Citi Field.
Citi Field.
On the 7 train, it stops at 96th Street. And that's because the art department had been working from the original script and had made the 96th Street signs, and there wasn't time to change it when we ended up going with the Mets on the 7 train. So, yeah, that was too bad.
That is too bad. Well, it's Derek's loss.
I think so.
So I have to ask you.
No, you don't.
What is the origin of the name Levin, which in Middle English
No,
means,
don't go there. Oh, my
No.
God. Yeah.
means lightning?
Yes, the dark secret of my family, which my parents swear they didn't know when they named me Thunder, is that Levin actually means lightning. And I found that out to my great dismay sometime in high school. Somebody had looked it up and confronted me with it. And I was like, no.
Before the internet?
Before the internet, yeah. They found an unabridged dictionary. And I was like, no, that can't be. My parents wouldn't do that to me. Well, as it turns out.
So other than that, how did your parents influence your career?
Oh. Well, I guess like any good parents in the 60s and 70s, they told me I could do whatever I wanted to do. You know, and there was no pressure to go into something where I might actually make a living.
They weren't looking for a lawyer or a doctor.
No. Well, my father was a journalist, and my mother was basically a housewife and a homemaker, but she was a big science fiction fan.
Really?
And that influenced me. Her father, my grandfather on my mother's side, which would be my mother's father, was one of the founding members of the British Interplanetary Society, along with Arthur C. Clarke and some others. So science fiction runs in the family, apparently. And so the one show that she let me stay up late to watch when I was a very little kid was the original Star Trek.
Oh, good taste.
Yes. And so that's where it started, I think. Somebody gave me a book called The Making of Star Trek. And again, I was, like knee-high to an ant. And it was way too dry for a little kid to read. I'd probably only just learned to read. So the first thing I did was I turned to the picture section. And I was just old enough to understand that I wanted to be Captain Kirk or Mr. Spock, and I was just old enough to understand that I couldn't because I was also watching the Apollo mission at the same time, and it was hopelessly crude and primitive, and I didn't want anything to do with that. But then someone gave me this book, and I opened it to the picture section. The very first picture in The Making of Star Trek, and I think it's still in print, is a bunch of studio technicians working on the bridge of the Enterprise in their 1960s, shirt sleeves. And suddenly in my little mind it clicked, I can work on the Enterprise. And that's where it all started.
I see. And so you...
Are these cards color coordinated?
They are color coordinated by topic.
Really?
Yes.
That's impressive. See, you come to Google for this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, actually, they're not quite in the Google colors. I kind of Googled that.
Oh, you're going to get fired now.
Yeah, well. So what was the first film you really fell in love with?
First movie?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. I don't have a good answer to that.
You have a good answer to everything.
Well, I mean, the first film that really, made an impression, a life-altering impression, was Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the first movie I'd ever seen. It wasn't the first movie that made me start thinking. And there was a movie called Silent Running.
Oh yeah. With Bruce Dern?
With Bruce Dern and these robots, where I'm convinced that's where Lucas got the idea for R2-D2, was the drones in Silent Running. And 2001. Yeah, but I mean, it was Star Trek on TV, and then it was seeing Star Wars for the first time. Because in the 70s, movies were dark and serious. Even the comedies were dark. And Star Wars was the first movie where you really got to have fun in the theater, I think, for a long time. You know, it was all Scorsese and Taxi Driver and French Connection and I don't know. And so Star Wars really kind of turned the things around for me and made it seem... Also the publicity behind Star Wars involved George Lucas so much that suddenly here was a guide for an actual career. Somebody had done this.
Oh, yeah.
And so it seemed like a little more realistic choice.
Suddenly it seemed like you could be George Lucas.
Well, that was the plan.
Uh-huh.
It didn't work out quite that way. But.
And, well, not yet.
Well, not yet, but I mean, they keep making all these new Star Wars movies now, and they're not hiring me. So, I mean, that was my original plan, is I was going to direct Episode 2. I figured Lucas would want to do 1 himself when he finally came back to it, but I was going to direct Episode 2. That was the career plan. Didn't work out. But as it turns out, I probably should have, because he kind of screwed things up.
Well, you know, if you're watching, this is your man. So your
Wait,
first...
where are the cameras?
They're hidden.
They're hidden.
Your first feature was Mutant Vampire Zombies from the Hood, or
You got to pause before you say "From the Hood."
From the Hood, sorry.
It's Mutant Vampire Zombies from the Hood. Yeah.
Or MVZTH for short.
Exclamation mark.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how did that kind of play into Sharknado? What did you kind of bring from that experience? What did you learn from that?
Well, the main thing about the zombie film was that we knew we weren't going to have a lot of money. And so first, I didn't want to do anything that we couldn't pull off. But second, I wanted to make sure that if we did do anything that we couldn't pull off, and it might look cheesy, I wanted to make sure the audience was laughing with us instead of at us. So I made sure to incorporate humor throughout. And, you know, obviously that was the same plan for Sharknado.
And
but nobody dived into a zombie and cut their way out.
there were some...
There were some questionable elements in that film, if that's where you're getting it. But.
No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say it did have some unique moments.
Yeah. Don't let your kids watch it.
But also, actually, when I watched the trailer again, it sort of resonated, you know, the gang violence, you know, and the police brutality and everything, and the teaming up of the police and the gangs, you know, kind of resonates with things happening today. So
yeah, I mean, people don't understand that I'm
film.
making socially relevant commentary in my films.
You know, the best commentary is disguised. So, so if you could go back in time to when
I can.
You can.
That's how I made Sharknado a hit. When it first came out, nobody watched. So I went back in time and fixed things.
Okay, that makes sense. Well, so maybe you've done this already, but I'll ask anyway. So, if you could go back.
See, now if we had planned this properly,
yeah,
you would have told me what you're about to say, and I would have started saying it before you asked me.
Oh, what a lost opportunity.
Yeah. Oh well. I'm sorry.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm going to try again to ask my question now.
I'm sorry.
So if you could go back in time to when you first arrived in LA, what career advice would you give yourself?
Wow. You know, people now, film students and wannabe writers, keep asking me for advice. And I'm really not sure what the answer is, because everything I did seemed to make sense. It just took a lot longer to get where I wanted to be than I expected. I don't have any good advice.
Well, at least you got where you wanted to be.
Well, not yet. I haven't directed Star Wars.
Okay, well, close.
Working on it.
So what other projects are brewing in the mind of Thunder Levin?
Well, I'm pitching 2 TV series. One is a serious apocalyptic. It's the end of the world is happening, sort of in slow motion. And my agent has that out right now. I've got another series that's more like Sharknado. It's sort of tongue-in-cheek. It's I've been describing it as Star Trek meets One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in a submarine. Ba- Basically, a group of escaped U.S. Navy mental patients hijack an experimental deep-diving submarine and are then the only people in a position to save the world when mysteriously the surface of the ocean starts freezing over. And they discover all sorts of strange worlds at the bottom of the sea, and eventually they discover that aliens are terraforming our planet and they have to save us, but that takes a while.
So once again, staying within the bounds of the possible.
Yeah.
Okay. And I've heard there's been talk of a Sharknado musical.
Well, I'll tell you, ever since the first movie, blew up and we started talking about a sequel, myself and the director, we've both been pushing to do Sharknado the musical. My suggestion for the title for the second one was Sharknado 2: The Great White Way. And they didn't go for it. And then, like, right around when the third movie came out, the powers that be started talking about maybe we should turn this into a Broadway musical. And so the director and I got very excited about that, and then nothing has really come of that. And then about a week or two ago, I was a fellow classmate, Richard Tucksmith, appeared out of nowhere and said, "Hey, are you going to this musical called Shark Attack? It's the unauthorized parody of Sharknado." And I had not heard about it, but I got my tickets and I went. And it was a staged reading. They were trying to get investors. But this show was great. I mean, it was funny. It was well written. The songs were catchy. And so I emailed the powers that be and said, "Look, guys, if we don't do our own musical very quickly, it's going to become irrelevant, because if these guys get to Broadway, there isn't going to be room for a real Sharknado musical. And so we should, if we're not doing our own, we should just license the title to them and let them put the real title on it." Yeah, so I'd love to do a musical. I mean, I started in musical theater in high school and college.
I remember that.
And the material just lends itself to song.
To song, yes. I think that's what everybody thought when they saw it.
And obviously, and dancing, and background dancers dressed up as sharks spinning around. I mean, it would be great. But actually, the one thing I liked about this Shark Attack musical is they took Tara Reid's character and made her touching and sympathetic and gave her real depth, which I had done in the original script. Because it was actually kind of a love letter to my ex-wife. And it was about how these two people would come together and find out that they still worked well together and they still had that chemistry. And then I guess when Tara got cast, that kind of went out the window. and suddenly she became a lot bitchier, and Nova sort of became the heroine of the...
I see.
Yeah. Yeah, so I liked seeing that in the musical.
Well, I hope we get to see that.
So anyhow, yeah, if you see Shark Attack the musical come out, it will still be unauthorized, but go see it because it was really good.
All right. So were there any scenes, anything that you really regret winding up on the cutting room floor, literally or metaphorically?
There was nothing that got on the cutting room floor. There were scenes that we couldn't shoot that just were clearly beyond our ability. In the first movie, there was a scene where Beverly Hills was completely flooded, and they were driving their car through, and they ran into this agent who was on his phone, and they yell at him, "There are sharks in the streets," and he's like, "No kidding, you wouldn't believe this deal I just closed." And then he gets eaten. In the second one, there was a whole act, a whole set piece that got cut, where the wave is washing over Manhattan and Rockefeller Center skating rink gets flooded. And they're all thrashing, trying to get out of the water, and the sharks are coming in, and that's when Tara Reid shows up and says, "Hey guys, need a hand," and helps rescue them. And then they're in a boat going down to the Empire State Building. And then the boat, something happens to the boat, and so Finn finds a hot dog stand cart, and he turns it upside down, and they climb in, and they surf down Fifth Avenue in this upturned hot dog cart umbrella.
Once again, staying within the bounds of the possible.
Yes.
Right. All right.
What? That makes sense.
So, speaking of cars, this is a shared passion of ours. You wrote a film titled 200 mph.
Yes.
How do you feel about self-driving cars?
I don't care for the idea.
I thought that might be the case.
They can drive my car when they pry it from my cold, dead hands.
And finally, I guess I wanted to, since you've both written and directed and both together, which of those do you find more difficult to do? Which comes easier?
Well, I mean, directing is physically a lot harder.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're working 16 hours a day. The stress is extraordinary. I've described directing a feature film as the most intense thing a human being can do short of going to war. And in fact, a film crew is organized very much like an army. So it's a lot harder. You know, writing, you're sitting at home in your pajamas at a computer. What's hard about that? When people start screwing with your work and giving you notes that don't make sense, that gets a bit challenging. Now, directing's a lot harder, but I also find it a lot more fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
I was supposed to direct Sharknado, and in hindsight, maybe I should have. But since it, I've sort of become re-pigeonholed as a writer, whereas I was always a director first and a writer second. And so actually that's my plan for this year, is to get back in the director chair.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you very, very much, Thunder Levin. And we'll turn it over to the audience now for questions.
Raise your hands.
Or
Who's
I
first?
think go to the mic.
Oh, we have
please.
a mic. Excellent. Oh, and a spotlight. Hey, you made the big time.
For Sharknado 3, who did you imagine would play the president, and how did you feel about Mark Cuban's performance there?
I loved Mark Cuban. I thought he was great. Who did we? I wanted. It was a pipe dream, but I wanted Harrison Ford to play the president. That just seemed obvious to me. And then the director had an idea that I thought was great. He wanted Bill Murray. And the idea was, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Saturday Night Live sketch where Lorne Michaels comes on and holds up a check for $3,000 and asks the Beatles to reunite, and he would pay them $3,000. And they could divide it up any way they wanted. They could give Ringo less, whatever. And so he was trying to get them to come down to the studio because he knew they were all in New York that night and perform. And so we were going to do a YouTube video making the same pitch to Bill Murray, because you know he doesn't have an agent. The only way you get Bill Murray in your movie is you call an 800 number, you leave a message, and you try and intrigue him. And you know he's traveling around he's traveling around the world. He doesn't even have a home address apparently, and he checks his messages, and if something sounds fun to him, he'll do it. So we thought if we did this YouTube video, it might get to him, and he might be tickled by it. But then Sci-Fi wouldn't let us announce that we were doing the film, or that the director and I were involved, until their PR machine was ready to make the announcement, and by then it was too late. And so we just started casting around. At one point they were talking about Donald Trump, you know, and I said, that's not realistic at all. And Mark Cuban was actually cast at the very last minute. We were shooting in LA. He was in New York. They got to him the night before, and he said, I'd love to do it. And they said, well, the only problem is we need you tomorrow morning. And he said, that's no problem. I'll just get on my plane. And he was there the next morning, and I thought he did a great job. I asked him at lunch if he ever thought about running for real, and he said, no, there are way too many skeletons in my closet for that.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right. Oh, come on. Someone else be brave.
Now, what made you choose to go to that mic?
It's closer.
Okay. But that one was already broken in.
That's true. Let's see. So you've done 3 Sharknado movies now, and there's going to be a 4th.
There is.
Do you ever wonder if maybe with the space scene in the 3rd movie that maybe you've jumped the shark?
Okay, from the beginning, people have been saying, sharks in space. So I felt like we had to do it.
Yeah.
And people have been saying we need sharks with frickin' laser beams on their heads. So there's no telling what might happen. No, I don't think we've jumped the shark for the simple reason that this is a movie about jumping the shark. I'm not convinced there's anything we can do that goes too far. On the first one, when I was writing the script, and I would get feedback from the producer saying, I think you might be going a little too far, I would just respond with the same one-sentence reply, it's Sharknado. We can't go too far.
All right. Well, going once.
That's it? I like your hat, by the way.
Yeah. All right. Come on, don't be shy.
Hi, I wanted to ask, going back to your opening remarks, if you think that I have a serious question.
Okay.
If you think that
Sharknado's a very serious business.
yeah, I know, right? I wanted to ask if you thought that the low budget, made-for-TV movie was like had a permanent place, and if you sort of thought that there could be like a cultural phenomenon like around those again, or if Sharknado was sort of this unique thing that can.
Well, I think now that it's happened, people have been trying to figure out how to replicate it, and it's too late because it's happened. You got to do something new. You got to do something different if you want to have that kind of impact. You can't. I mean, obviously they've gotten behind it for the sequels, but the first one had almost no marketing. This was not a manufactured hit. In fact, one of the reasons that I think Sharknado took off summer of 2013 is that there have been a series of big budget blockbuster flops in the theaters. And people were getting tired of being force-fed these things and told that this is the event of the summer, you must go see this. I mean, that was the summer that Lone Ranger with Johnny Depp came out and failed spectacularly. So I think the biggest threat to Sharknado's continued success is them trying to manufacture it.
Sure.
And it's a concern because we're trying to walk a tightrope, I guess, between getting the word out and not making it seem like this is something you have to go do. But to recreate that, I think you need to do something else. And I don't know what the answer to that is, although actually I'm working on a transmedia thing that is trying to accomplish the same thing, but through a very different route. I think it worked because it was different and it was unexpected.
Sure.
And so once the unexpected becomes expected, you got to do something even more unexpected.
Well, I guess part of what I'm asking is that like the low budget horror movie has like become a genre now. So.
Well, it's always been a genre.
Okay.
I mean, going back to the 1950s with Little Shop of, or 60s, I guess, Little Shop of Horrors. And then Roger Corman, was churning out these B movies. And of course, Rocky Horror, I mean, it's not really a horror film, but Rocky Horror Picture Show, defined what a cult movie was. Mm-hmm. And that wasn't a manufactured thing. That became a hit, several years after it was released. There have always been low-budget horror films and low-budget, B movies. And actually, they're kind of dying out because you can't get them in the theater anymore. Uh-huh. You can't get them on the shelf at Blockbuster anymore. It's very hard.
It's hard to get anything on the shelf at Blockbuster.
Well, exactly. But that's sort of my point, is it's hard for something like this to be found by the audience. Uh-huh. And so Sci-Fi Channel has become almost the only place for it. Maybe YouTube or something like that is going to become a place for it, but finding anything on the internet is very difficult, breaking through the clutter because there's so much stuff. So the whole industry is kind of in flux right now, as to how smaller projects are going to find an audience. So I don't know that we invented anything new or reignited. We just, I don't know, we just came along at the right time.
I see.
I mean, an interesting side note. Actually, this is being recorded. I'm not going to talk about that. Never mind. Yeah. I don't know. I think the more they try to duplicate the success, the harder it will be, and the less successful they'll be.
Sure.
So there's got to be something new.
Yeah. Could you talk more about the transmedia project you're working on?
Well, if I give too much away, it won't work. It's something that's going to start on Snapchat probably.
Okay.
And then we hope it will catch on and become either a web series or an actual TV series or a feature film. And we're going back to a classic radio broadcast for inspiration. And I think I should leave it there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Well, that's appropriate because I sort of thought, Sharknado was kind of the War of the Worlds of its era. War of the Worlds had that,
Right.
sudden
Yeah. Well,
onslaught of technology.
the beautiful thing that happened that night was that it just happened. Nobody planned it. Nobody promoted it. People just saw the commercial or the trailer and thought, how ridiculous is this? And some of those people tuned in. I mean, I'm convinced, we had millions of people tweeting about it. I'm convinced that most of them weren't even watching the movie. They were just responding to what the few people who were watching the movie were saying. I mean, Mia Farrow and Philip Roth posted this photo of them supposedly watching Sharknado, and Mia Farrow tweeted, OMG, 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 Sharknado. And as it came out later, this was actually a photo they had taken several days before, watching something else or looking at their computer or something. But they thought it was funny to post it for Sharknado. To this day, I don't know if Mia Farrow actually watched Sharknado or not. Yeah, it was just something that happened, and that was what was so great about it.
Well, that was. Okay, I think on that note, we'll close.
Nobody
Thank
else?
you very, very much.
Right.
Oh, sorry. No,
Nope.
go ahead.
Come on.
Please.
I got all day. You're the ones who have to go back to work.
Talking about how it kind of got a lot of people watching live shows, do you think that had any push to the producers and the executives saying that they would do live musicals on TV? And kind of the O.J. Simpson miniseries seems to be something that people are talking about a lot that have happened since your movie came out. Do you
Yes,
see any
Sharknado is responsible for everything that's happened since. I don't know. I mean, the live musical had been happening before, but I think the Twitter response to Sharknado opened a lot of people's eyes. And they saw that maybe there was another way to make things happen other than the traditional method they'd been using for years. And the industry is in a remarkable state of flux right now, and nobody's quite sure how anything but the giant blockbuster movie can be made, because it costs so much for a marketing campaign to open a movie and to cut through the clutter. How do small films find an audience? Medium-sized films even, they're not getting made. And so everybody's trying to figure this out. I mean, I have meetings with producers on a regular basis, where they'll say, like, yes, Terminator and Predator and the original Highlander, great, modestly budgeted films, can't make those anymore because there's no way to get them to the market. If it costs $100 million to market a feature film, why would you make a $5 million film? It makes sense to make a $100 million film. And so the whole industry is trying to figure out a new workflow, a new method for doing something besides the blockbuster. Because we've lost the shelves of Blockbuster, and we've lost the small theaters that will show small movies, and we've lost a way to bring them to market. So I think in the next 10 years, there's going to be a revolution in how movies are brought to the people. And I don't know what the answer is, because if I had the answer, I'd be rich.
If you had the answer, we'd try to hire you.
Okay. I have the answer.
All right. All right. I
yeah,
lined
but-
up an interview slate for you this
Excellent,
afternoon, just in
excellent.
case you said
Okay.
that.
Yeah, so I don't know if we really influenced those live musicals or not, but I think we did open some people's eyes to how to have that shared communal experience, because that's what it's all about. And it is something that resonates for people and has since the beginning of time.
All right.
They're coming to get us.
I think that's our cue.
Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Number 11.